Oh yeah, could you imagine? I know they're raising the bar here.
Trying to keep us all satisfied.
That's right. Bribery always does.
Bribery is
You want me to save one muffin for you?
You might as well. And if Pastor Dave makes it,
Yeah.
it's my guy right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That with his big. We're gonna.
Always sign there.
No, sorry. Just one. Go ahead. Yeah.
In fact, I get more.
Thank you.
Gotta have it.
I stared at all class.
That's not good. I think we'll go ahead and get started. And again, if you haven't signed in for Pastor Dave, please be sure to do so. And if you haven't taken one of or two of the muffins, please help yourself. Evidently, Pastor Dave has upped the ante a little bit by baking muffins rather than just getting donuts, which is to say, the bribery level has gone up considerably. I want for us to begin with shifting gears a little bit and begin a conversation with a couple of texts from Jeremiah. Before we do that, I just went back a little bit on one of our slides, and you may recognize this from the prophet. Thanks for making me feel as if I'm speaking to my students all over again. Unfair question. Micah, of course. Okay. Micah, of course. And it culminates, this is the text that culminates with what we talked a little bit about, is something of a court scene between God and the people, where the idea was, I have done this for you, I have done this for you, I have sent Moses, I have sent Aaron, I have sent, Miriam, I have delivered you from war, and yet, okay? And the people's response is, what do you want from me? Do you want regular offerings? I can do that. Do you want, I don't know, 1,000 rivers of oil? I can do that. How about 10,000 rivers? How about my firstborn? Okay, so in other words, if you want me to repair the relationship, it seems that my approach is to not only give an offering that is acceptable, but raise the ante to the point of that which is absolutely unacceptable and going through that which is difficult, if not impossible. And then it ends with this verse, which essentially says, all that I want from you is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And we saw this text once again from Micah being elevated, frankly, to a place of national consciousness on Thursday during, Jimmy Carter's eulogy, as one of his one of the texts that was very important to him. And it's always a striking thing to me. Again, encapsulating much of what really we've been talking about, which is, here's the thing: be just, okay? Be merciful, be kind, be humble. Am I asking too much here? Okay. By the way, that falls right into the category of love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, semicolon. But if it stopped there, right, you would need several lifetimes. But it continues, and you're, okay. So we see these connections, and it's impossible to avoid them. Not that we would want to avoid them, but it's impossible to avoid them. And this was one that it seems seemingly, okay. I want to say just a couple other things quickly before we get into Jeremiah. Martin Luther famously, I'm going to put you on the spot here, as you know full well, I'm capable of doing. Okay. Famously referred to one biblical book as a book of straw. Okay? Excellent. He refers to James as a book of straw. Why? You remember? And by the way, I think I'm not a New Testament scholar. So if you go out and you quote me on this, you know what I will do. I will deny it. Okay? It stresses service. It gives the impression that, in fact, the only thing that is important is works. Okay, and I think biblical scholars who really are deeply sort of connected with this will tell you, well, actually, Luther was not just, it's taken out of context. But you want, of course, faith, right? Faith. Faith without, without works is empty, right? So, what we get here is not this idea that I want you to only focus on stuff, on doing stuff. It has to be grounded. There has to be a foundation, if you will. And it comes in a way, in a eulogy. It could come in practically any context. In this instance, it came in a eulogy. And again, because I love language, and I suspect all of us do as well in different ways. Eulogy, of course, means it's really the Greek version in a way of the Latin benediction. It literally means good word, as in EU plus logos. It's a good word. It's interesting that eulogy as a good word comes not for the one who is gone, but really is for us who are listening. And I'm struck by this in part because what we're talking about is not something that is only academic. It is certainly that, I suspect, but it has practical implications about how we live our lives. If that were not the case, this whole kind of enterprise would be kind of interesting but silly. Okay? But it has implications. How do we live justly? What does it mean to love mercy? What does it mean to walk humbly with your God? So, one other, and we'll move on here. One other quick note here. It is interesting, and I mentioned this, that in Judaism, there is a body of laws, and I'm reducing this to just sort of a very lowest common denominator. There's a body of laws that is called the halakha, okay, which is an important thing, okay. Now, the word has very little to do with law. The word literally means to walk. And so you have this interesting idea that if you're going to embrace, imperatives about love and about care and about humility and about mercy and about justice, what do you need to do? You have to walk the walk. We have coined the phrase, right? You have to walk the walk. You have to live this. But again, you can't simply say, well, I love justice. And then someone like me would say, Mark, what does that mean? And Mark would say, I love justice. It falls in the category of define justice. And by the way, just as a matter of a rule of thumb, we could never use a word in the definition of the word by defining the word. Okay. So we can't say, well, justice is when we are just. So last time we ended on this note, and I just want to connect this, and it's always a striking thing. For example, in the sermon this morning, Pastor Roy he used the language of crack and being cracked. And of course the reference, which has become very famous, that only in cracks do you get a chance to have light enter. Okay. Now retired, there was a philosopher, fairly recent actually, at the University of Chicago. Her name is Martha Nussbaum. Has written extensively, mostly scholarly things, but extensively. And she once said that we human beings are like flawed crystals. And by the way, it's an invitation to decide for ourselves how flawed really are the crystals. But it presupposes that there is a beauty and that there is also a fragility to who we are. We are crystals, but we are flawed. Maybe some of those are sort of hairline fractures that you can't see, and maybe some of those are just wide open, but we're flawed crystals. So last time we ended on the note where Jeremiah was saying to the people, and I will read this again. The word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, amend your ways and your doings, and let me dwell with you in this place. Do not trust in these deceptive words. This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. In other words, simply because you are repeating something that is literally true in a place where you are, does not really mean much, unless, of course, God is in that place and that you're active about it. Okay, it's not enough to simply repeat, this is a sacred place. It's the temple of the Lord. And by the way, you notice I read the text. This is Jeremiah repeating this. You cannot keep repeating this over and over and over, assuming that after 3 times it becomes true and you can't touch me. It's not enough. And then we get this idea, if and then. Okay, and it sounds like if you scratch my back. Okay, the quid pro quo approach. It's not. It's much more of a relational. Listen, if you really want to have this relationship, right, you can't have it in a way that is one-sided. You can't. It has to have, the definition, by definition, you have to have more than just one active in this. So if you do this, then, but you have to act justly. That's what it says. If you truly amend your ways, and truly here means what? I mean, Jesus used the language, of course, in the Old King James, verily, right? It's the same idea. I mean, it's not just, I guess I'm just going to go ahead and amend my ways. No, I mean, if you truly amend your ways, if you really do. No, really, really, Alan, you have to. Then, and you act justly. It's interesting because it says you have to act justly. Then we will get to where we need to be in terms of our relationship. And then we begin now at verse 16. How challenging is this? Remember now, Jeremiah the prophet is essentially the voice of, not quite the voice of God, but in a way, Jeremiah stands between God and the people. He will bring certain things to God and, of course, voices the expectations of God to the people. And it says here, which is painful, but we have to deal with it. This is now God saying to Jeremiah, as for you, by the way, I don't know in the history of a statement where God says to a servant or a witness or a prophet, where it begins, as for you, that much good comes after that. Okay. It falls right alongside when 2 people say, I think we need to talk. In the history of, I think we need to talk, nothing good comes after that. So God says to Jeremiah, as for you, this is, if you're looking for the definition of indictment, do not pray for these people. Holy cow, to use other religious language. Do not pray for these people. Do not raise a cry or prayer on their behalf. Do not intercede with me. The word intercede means what? By the way, literally the root means to go in between. That's what the root is. Okay? Do not act on their behalf for me. Don't. Prayer is relational, of course. I think, not you and I, because we are enlightened in this group, but there are far too many folks that think of prayer as if somehow it's a catalog of things that I need. But it's relational, right? It's relational. This is not stuff, as sometimes it is seen. So let me read this in its entirety, just this verse. As for you, do not pray for these people. Do not raise a cry or a prayer on their behalf. Do not intercede with me, for I will not hear you. And we in meaning human beings have figured out a way of saying, I don't want to listen to what you say, la 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 la, that kind of thing. This is the divine version of this. Okay. I'm not going to hear you. Which, by the way, just so that you know, it's a matter of translation here. Okay, we'll get to this. We'll get to the use of this word in a second. This word could also easily and accurately be translated, I will not listen to you. It's the same word. Okay, it all depends on the context, and frankly, it depends on the translators. Okay, so I'm not going to listen to you, which has a different kind of, I'm not giving away trade secrets here, but we had, how shall I say? It was last year. We had a fairly sort of, I think contentious would be a fair word, meeting at my institution, primarily among the deans and the provosts and the people with rare power, which should tell you it's probably not the deans here. So we had this, and it was about the topic. And one of the committee members, who happened to be a provost, who is no longer there, kept saying, I hear you. We hear what you're saying. And I kept saying, you're not listening to what we're saying. By the way, you can't keep saying you hear me. Okay, which, by the way, is often a way of saying, keep going, move on. I hear you. What does that mean? Next, you have a follow-up statement? But are you listening to what I'm saying? So it could easily be that. So Jeremiah now is in a way put on notice. By the way, you cannot keep advocating and interceding on behalf of these people unless they really kind of get their act together, to put it bluntly. And right now, they don't. So it goes on. And this, well, I happen to think all of this is important, and I hope you do as well. But this is particularly important what comes next. Is it I whom they provoke, says the Lord? You really think that ultimately, I'm the one that you're upsetting? Is it not yourself, according to the prophet? By the way, your actions ultimately is going to hurt you. My anger and my wrath shall be poured out on this place. And then it says, here's the thing. My anger and my wrath will be poured out on this place on human beings. It could stop there. We could have a period there, or a full stop, as we say. That's it, right? because human beings are the ones who are doing this. But it goes on and it says, and animals, and the trees of the field, and the fruit of the ground, it shall be burned. And you would be right in saying, what did the trees do? What did the fruits do? What did Rover the Wonder Dog do? And the answer is nothing. But you have this kind of creation motif that says we human beings, in terms of our actions, have the capacity to either bring about good for all of creation or, conversely, right, to the detriment of creation. There are consequences that may not have anything to do what my poor pet has done, or what the tree in my yard has done, or what the fruits have done, or what the land has done, except for what we have done. And this is not the only prophet who is saying this. I would remind you, I don't have it in front of me, I would remind you that in the prophet Hosea, when the people had fallen away, there is the language that I will, remember, I will take you into the wilderness, I will woo you. We don't use that language anymore, right? But you know, I will court you, and we will reestablish a relationship, and there will be war no more. By the way, how is that working out? And, right? And it goes on to talk about animals, and it goes on to talk about creation, all of creation. In other words, when there's restoration among human beings and redemption among human beings with God, it has implications for all of creation. When there are consequences on our actions, it has implications for all of creation. Jeremiah and his scribe are writing approximately 3,000 years ago. Okay, remember Jeremiah is writing in the 6th century, and now we're 2,400 years later. Okay, plus the 600. We'll use up all of my math skills there. And we read this and realize, wow. Okay, are there implications for us? Absolutely. So then, what do we need to do? And that's why, as it's kind of like nondescript, it's a word that I would imagine we use on a daily basis multiple times. This is not one of these, I got to go home and check the etymology because I've never heard of it. This is the word yet. And I think of this word as having two broad sort of connotations, both biblically but also just in everyday life. On the one hand, it could be, I have done this, I have done this, I have done this, and yet. Okay? And so it could be a word of disappointment. For me, at least for our children and our family, I hope that I don't ever use the D word with our children. That is disappointment. I hope I never ever have a moment in my life where I have to say, well, I guess you have just been a disappointment to me. Could you imagine? I can't imagine. But yet can be, we see it in the text, the Micah text. I have done this, I have done this, I have done this. And yet, on the one hand. On the other, yet can be a word of grace and a word of redemption. And what we find with the prophets is that the yet idea does not end on punishment. It is not meant on, let me catalog all of the terrible things that you have done. And once I have cataloged that and I put a full stop after it, I'm done. No, we don't have that. Instead, the prophet says, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, I did not speak to them or command them concerning burnt offering. By the way, what God is saying to the people and through the prophet, I did not go around telling people what I really, really want in this life are burnt offerings. Did I tell you, that's great. But what's the problem with burnt offerings or any offerings? And by the way, implications for us today as well, even from ancient times to modern times. The issue is straightforwardly, it cannot be an end in itself. And the people had turned offerings, burnt and otherwise, into an end. What do you want from me? You remember Amos? You do remember Amos? We talked about him. The people are saying, I go to Gilgal and I go to Bethel and I tithe twice a week and I go to the temple twice a week. What do you want from me? Or we see with Micah, I have a burnt offering of a calf. You want 1,000 rams? 10,000 rivers of oil? In other words, the offering became an end in and of itself. And the prophet, God is saying to the prophet, Did I ask you for this? No. Can you do this? Sure. But as a means, right? As a means. In fact, you no doubt already know this. The sacraments in the church are viewed as there's a phrase, means of grace. Means of grace. You notice, the sacrament is not an end. It's a means of grace. That's the language. So, what do? How are we going to restore? How are we going to rectify? Where is a note of redemption? Where is the yet of grace? If I've thought about this, by the way. I have a note to myself from years ago written on I discovered it just a few months ago. It's on a little napkin, I think, from some restaurant chain that doesn't exist anymore. And it was a note to myself, think of the title of a book that is called The Yet of Grace. I'm not writing any such book, but the point, it would be, to me, it would be a great title, and I'm happy to have you use that if you wish. So where's the yet of grace here? This is the command I gave you, according to the text. This is the command I gave you. Obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. Is that so complicated? I know theologians like to write, volumes that are as large as War and Peace, and many do. Or Ulysses. I don't know if you've ever read Ulysses. Okay? It's like one entire 1,000-page stream of consciousness. And you're thinking, Hemchand, stop making up stuff. I'm not. It's true. But what it comes down to is this. Don't let's overcomplicate this. Here's what I want. Obey my voice. I will be your God and you will be my people. Here's what I want. Walk only in the way that I command you, that it might be well with you. Yet, if you do not obey or incline their ear, but in the stubbornness of their evil ways they walk in their own counsels and look backwards rather than forwards. Does any of this have implications for us, by the way? Okay, just checking. From the day that your ancestors came out of the land of Egypt until this day, I have persistently sent all of my servants and my prophets to them day after day, and yet they did not listen to me or pay attention, but they stiffened their necks. So you shall speak these words to them, and they will not listen to you. You shall call to them, and they will not answer you. You shall say to them, this is the nation that did not obey the voice of the Lord their God and did not accept their discipline. Truth has perished. So here you have it, right? You either obey and have a relationship, or you don't. And one of the consequences of not obeying is truth becomes a casualty. Again, not overly complicated here. So let's focus on obey. One of the great things about words like obey, or frankly, any of the words that we're using here today, is that they are common words. Right? We know it. So let me pause and let me wonder with you. How would you define or explain obey? By the way, I wonder, since we don't have children in here, right, you could speak freely. So, yeah, your definitions will not scare the kids or the grandkids. What would you suggest? Yes.
To listen and respond to the command and words you hear.
To listen and to respond.
Follow through.
To follow through.
Do what you should do.
Do what you should do. By the way, now, again, on a serious note, words like ought and should, right, are sort of slippery words. You know this, right? You know, I really ought to, right? You know, I should really, maybe I could. Perhaps. And you see where this, right? What you end up doing, essentially, is talking yourself out of something and justifying it. Now, Alan is not doing this on a serious note. I'm not, right? But the thing about obey is the same word in Hebrew that is translated hear or listen. It's the same word. It's a matter of context. It's the same word. Which is to say that if you are going to obey, maybe by definition you must first what? Listen. And in listening should lead you to acting. And by the way, obedience is a word that has to do with what we do, with acting. And you know the word, maybe the most important confessional sort of biblical statement for Jews is called a what? Well, let me rephrase that. It's perhaps the most important and well-known confession of the monotheistic nature of God, which of course would be not only for Jews, but for Christians and for Muslims as well. But now in reference specifically for Jews in this context. And it is called, someone is whispering it back there. that E, which seems like if my eyes are playing tricks on me and I've lost the line, but it's an elevate. In Hebrew it's what is called a half E, and so it's almost not pronounced, and therefore the word sounds like Shema instead of Shema. Okay, Shema, and you know that phrase in Hebrew. It's Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Okay, and you can repeat that. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Okay, it's a confessional statement of monotheistic nature. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. One God. Okay. That's the word that is used here. Very common, and yet it takes on the kind of force that you cannot overlook by simply saying, yeah, I know the whole obedience thing, but no. It's very clear, and it's an imperative. Obey and listen, if you will. Now, let me pause here for a second. Okay. What we're going to do next is to jump to a later text from Jeremiah. And by the way, I don't know if you've ever experienced that. I have. And I have. And you can scream bloody murder for a while. But the intent is to do what? Heal and cleanse. It's to heal and cleanse. And I remember as a young boy, it's a few years ago, out playing with my friends, barefooted, as we always did. Okay, the idea of, let me see what pair of tennies I might wear, that did not exist. Okay, we're out playing barefooted, and I stepped on on a broken bottle. Okay, and I don't know if it's still the case in those days. Who cares, right? You throw stuff on the road and the grass, and I stepped in the grass on a broken bottle, and sure enough, right, gash on my foot, on my heel, and I came, and as a kid, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's kind of like being in school and getting reprimanded by a teacher. What's your greatest fear? Yes, you don't want your parents to find out about this, right? By the way, translate, the last thing I wanted is to go and tell my mother about this, who was already concerned about my welfare, with some justification. But I go to my absolutely wonderful, angelic sister-in-law, who saw me and does what many of us might do, and does something like this. Okay? Takes me under the outside pipe, puts my heel under the water, washes away this stuff, and then holds my foot and pours salt into that. And then, do you know what soft grease is? Literally, it is grease, like a candle grease, but very soft, that is lit and quickly drips and seals the wound. And both of those things you could cry bloody murder for. Okay. I want you to keep that idea of salt in the wound as it's connected here. Because when Jeremiah, the people are being sent into exile, and he is the prophet, and being sent into exile, in large part, I might say, because of the leadership at the time, the king, who essentially said, what are you going to do, Nebuchadnezzar? I'm going to flex my muscles and show you. And before you know it, who is suffering? The people. And they're taken into exile. which, by the way, translate that 1,000,000 times over from a wound that I have on my foot. They're in exile. They don't have a choice. They're dragged away. Okay? And Jeremiah the prophet sends them a letter. And he will join them. He suffers with them. It's one of the rare things you find in the prophetic books. He not only prophesies, but he lives to see his prophecy come true. It's easy for you and I to say, you know, in about 25 years or 40 years, this is going to happen. Good luck. And, you know, but then he lives to see this. And this is what he says. These are the words of the letter of the prophet Jeremiah, sent from Jerusalem to the remaining elders among the exiles, to the priests, to the prophets, and all of the people that Nebuchadnezzar had taken into exile from Jerusalem into Babylon. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent. Okay? Here is what the prophet says to the people in exile. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage. We're talking about a different time right now, right? And by the way, before we think, well, at least we don't do that anymore, right? We still use the language, don't we? Right? Most famously in weddings, we still hear what? Who gives this woman, right? What we don't hear is, who gives this guy? No one will take ownership. That's right. I'm not. And by the way, that's a confessional right over there. That's right. Has nothing to do with Jeremiah. It has to do. I have a moment. I'm going to confess it right now. What we don't find is, of course, the reverse. But to give the person, you must first what? Own the person, right? That's the language here, right? But we get the idea of what's happening here. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on their behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So if we're going into exile, and we have this notion that, you know what? I am not going to unpack my suitcase in Babylon. I'm just going to go there, and I will show those Babylonians I'm not interested in living here. And the prophet is saying what? No. You are going to go there, and you're going to build houses. And you're going to live in them. And you're going to plant trees. And you're going to use their produce. And you're going to have children. And you're going to have your children marry. In other words, your time in exile is going to be what? It's going to be a while. Okay? This is not an overnight thing. It's going to be a while. Now, that in and of itself is a serious challenge, isn't it? You're telling me that I'm going into exile and it's going to be for more than a generation? And if there was a full stop there, it would be something in and of itself. But it's not a full stop. What does it say? I mean, it's a remarkable statement. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So if you believe and you think that you're going to go there and you're going to separate yourself from those evil Babylonians, think twice. Your welfare in Babylon will depend on what? Their welfare, but not just only their welfare. You have to seek out their welfare. So it would be bad enough to say, your welfare is tied to theirs because they have grocery and therefore I can get grocery. You have to ensure. Okay? So now, why is this a big deal? When you think of the word welfare, which by the way is right out of the New Revised Standard Version, which is the translation I'm using, I don't think there is any such thing as a perfect translation of the Bible, even though there are some people who have been selling Bibles for $68 recently. Okay. The perfect Bible out there. There is no such perfect translation. Okay, so it depends what you're reading. I happen to think this is probably as good as we get. Okay, there are some translations that are beautiful to read actually, which might sound crazy because, isn't it the same reading? Actually, if you read the Jerusalem Bible, which is a beautiful translation, it's a wonderful sound to read it as well. But in terms of sheer technicality and academic, the New Revised Standard Version, which is where I get this. So quickly now, when you think of welfare, what do you associate with it? Support?
Really loving your captors. Really loving your captors.
Really loving your captors. But how do we think about it in our context? Since we are not in captivity, I don't think, yet. Poverty, helping, the success, culture. That's the word that is used there, which I know means nothing to you because it's in Hebrew. But of course, it means everything to you because you know the word, of course, and it is this. It's the Hebrew shalom without vowels. If you put vowels in, it will look like that. And I know that all of a sudden clears it up for you. You were thinking, if you would only put the vowels, it would make sense. So what the text says, seek the shalom of your captors, because in their shalom, you will find your shalom. If you really want to survive, you have to do what? Pursue the peace of your enemies. By the way, if you're thinking that the bar is high, you would be right. This is not a natural human instinct. Let's not be silly about this. You are going into exile. Your instinct is to do what? Protect yourself and do what? Fight. And if you think I'm making this up, let me read you something that should tell you how the people felt. And then we'll stop. Psalm 137. I'll read this to you. And this is how the people felt. In case you were wondering if Jeremiah said, oh yeah, seek the welfare of the people. Well, we can do that. Seek the peace. Yeah. I mean, love your enemies. It seems natural. No, it doesn't. Our impulse is to do what? Yes, revenge, right? Punish them. By the rivers of Babylon, by the way, you've probably heard this in song as well, right? By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept. If that psalm ended there, it would break our hearts immediately because we can begin to envision. When we remembered Zion, Zion is, of course, really Jerusalem, right? On the willows there we hung up our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs and our tormentors for mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." By the way, does that ring a bell for anything? Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? We can talk about that next time. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth, if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem's fall, how they said, tear it down, tear it down, tear it down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, you devastator. And then it ends on this note. Happy shall they who pay you back. This is what the human impulse is. Happy shall they be who pay you back what you have done to us. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rock. Do you want to know how I feel in exile? So you are saying to me, seek the welfare, seek the peace, seek the goodness of my enemies, so that my goodness will be predicated on their goodness. And I'm saying, what I really want is to take their little children and bash their heads against the rocks. By the way, I don't think we are on the same page here. I'll leave you with this note. Yet, two things happened. On the one hand, there was a prophet who was saying, everything is fine. This is before the exile. What are you worried about here, Mark? Things are going to go swimmingly. By the way, who would you prefer to listen to? The prophet who thinks things are going to go swimmingly, or some guy who is saying, build houses, you're going to be there for the long term? You want to believe, because of course we want to think positively, right? Only to discover that there is such a thing as false prophets. It was in the time of Jeremiah, and his name was Hananiah. We have false prophets who are alive and well today. Yes, they don't have the names Hananiah, but they exist. Okay? The words of Jeremiah rings true 3,000 years later. How, serious note, how do we love our enemies? The question is not whether we should or need to or ought to. It is what? An imperative. Love your enemies. Period. All right. We need to stop there before Pastor Dave kicks me out and or stop baking baking stuff for us. We will continue this next time.